Hey, welcome back. Wanted to spend a little time today talking about knife deployment. I have some thoughts on this. I think what you'll see, or what I have to say like up front, is that if you're of the mind that opening with two hands is all good, then this may not be the video for you. I spent a ton of time having my main EDC be a Victorinox. I can actually see a situation where I potentially carry both, but that versus that are definitely two different experiences for the user. And I think it took me a while, but I finally got to the point where I was like, do I really need all these tools, or do I need them as much as I enjoy just a really nice, easy deployment? And I've reached that point where, or sometime this year, I reached that point where this stopped being my main EDC and this did, or something like this, right? Now, a lot of people carry both. I can definitely see doing both, especially with a two-layer like this, plus this knife. Like, I could probably make that work. But in general, these days around the house and stuff, I'm mostly carrying this with these placed in different places in the house, depending which one it is. This is my main Victorinox Scientist. It's actually like a replica of a Victorinox Scientist using all standard parts, but I think I've now to the point where most of the time I'm going to be carrying something that I can deploy really easily. Typically, if you've seen the channel, you'll know that it's this 8020.5 from Demco. This is a Grivory handle with a shark's foot blade, a really utilitarian blade that I love for EDC. But I'm going to leave the blades out of it for now and just talk a little bit about deployment, because it's been sort of top of mind for me lately. I've switched up my knives a little more than I usually do this week, and a few different knives have seen pocket time. Let me share the main ones that have. So this is another Demco 8020.5, but with Timascus. The bug out found its way into my pocket. This other bug out found its way into my pocket this week. What else was in there? Definitely quite a bit of time with the holidays using the gentleman's knife with the Tactile Knife Company Rockwall thumb stud. And actually, for the first time, started to have a few other deployment models start to find their way in. I'm big on the thumb stud, and I kind of say that because this is a pretty difficult thumb stud to actuate here on the Hinderer, so I more have to flip it when I use it. But I've started to come back around. I used to use more of a flipper knife. I didn't really know how to do a reverse flick. As you can see, I'm still not expert at it. But that started to work its way into my pocket, with the reverse flick being kind of fun, and this being just sort of a cool, like, grunge sort of feel to it. This one found its way into my pocket. So there's been a little pocket diversity the last like week or two. It got me thinking a lot about deployment and how I think about deployment. And there's a few things that come to mind for me. One is, am I using a thumb stud like this? Am I rolling it out? Am I, using some sort of more rapid deployment model? Am I using a fuller, like something like this, that, really you can use your thumb actually on this quite well. If it's a good knife, then you can, generally use your thumb on it, but you're generally going to find something like this is a bit more comfortable from the reverse flick method, like that. And then you find some knives that have a little bit of both. That's like kind of my preference, would be for a knife to have both, like the Demco does, and that's why I spend so much time in my pocket. And then there's, other models. In fact, these bug outs have, a really good, the Axis lock, or depending which brand you get it from, you'll hear this bar lock called many different things, but they can be deployed without having to use a thumb stud, a fuller, a flipper, or anything like that. And you could do the same thing with the Demcos with the shark lock, where you can deploy without having to use one of them. So it's just been on my mind lately. Spyderco's been a little bit of top of mind lately. I think this is one of the better fullers, as long as it's not all of them, but some of them, depending on the shape and the size and stuff, I think are really good. So I'll throw that on there, because it's not this particular model, but I was carrying one of my Spyderco's a little bit this week and doing some unboxings with it. So just maybe because of the holidays, because this one ended up in my pocket, it inspired me a little bit to try some other new things. And some of my other knives in my collection have gotten a little more love than they had in the past, perhaps, due to the various conditions of my situation over the holidays. And yeah, there've been some like interesting takeaways for me on this. For one, I think there's a few things. One is like, what's that deployment method? So is it a thumb stud, a fuller? Do you use the locking mechanism itself to flip the knife open? Do you use a flipper? There are more, of course, but those I think are the primary sort of 4 methods that you would see. There's of course automated knives. I'm not going to talk about automatic knives, but you know, they exist as well. I think the second one is how's the detent, because you know, something like this bug out is extremely light on the detent. The little spring here actually acts as the detent. You can see the bar lock move as it opens, and that acts as the detent versus, you know, something like a liner lock where the detent is actuated by the lock itself inside of there, and you get a much different feel to it, more of a snappy feel. You could hear the pop on that. I actually put that one in my brother's hands over the Thanksgiving day or evening, and he thought it was an automatic knife because it would pop out so hard. My brother normally carries a bug out like this, and by comparison, he actually thought that was an automatic knife because the explosion that you feel when it pops open, I'd say the Devo Stout also, you get a little bit of that sense when it pops open. It's just explosive, as well as the Urban EDC F5.5, and sometimes the Spyderco's maybe too. Versus these spring-based knives feel a little different than the you know, either frame lock or liner lock or embedded liner lock knives. So there's, you know, a bit of that detent, and one of the problems with detent can be that sometimes that can stop you from even being able to like use the knife properly. Like this knife I can barely get open with the thumb stud. I can only do it once. Now I actually need to, I don't normally carry this. I would actually switch this and then probably be able to get a little better purchase on it in order to use the thumb stud. But like I find with this thumb stud, I can only get it out of there maybe like half the time or something like that. Sometimes I can even do it better lefty than I can righty because I think it's pushing away from the detent or something like that. But just one of the nuances of knives and one of the criticisms I've had for Hinderer, and I've definitely gotten the feedback from people that Triway is tuned differently and you have to get in there and maybe tune it yourself and stuff. But the flipper has actually been a pretty good deployment method for me lately. Maybe I should do this. This is kind of my usual go-to EDC of late. And then this was my sort of my go-to for shorts, and then you kind of get in line from there. That's probably the more appropriate way to do it. But there's the detent. That's definitely a big piece of it. It's part of why, like, as more of a beginner, I really enjoyed the bug out. But now that I've been around knives longer, I'm starting to appreciate other models more, because I don't need the knife to be that easy to open. That one's still on the hard side, whereas I think, you know, someone that's been in knives, I've been around knives for 30 years, but not these like kind of pop open folding knives. I've had some of those in the past, but they were usually pretty cheap. These more expensive ones, you know, they run the detent pretty hard and stuff. Another one that's definitely been on my list a few times has been the Wee Banter, and I think that's probably one of the best balances. When I first got it, I think I maybe struggled a tad with it, but now I pretty consistently deploy this one really well. I think it kind of strikes a really good middle balance on detent versus a lot of the other knives that are out there. You know, let's leave the rest of the elements of the knife out for now, but food for thought on that. So the detent, the other part is like the safety of it. I've noticed with some of the knives, for instance, like the Spyderco, when you're trying to thumb flick the fuller, you have a tendency to kind of come past the blade after you've deployed it. I'll show an example of that, or at least it's for me, is that my thumb ends up kind of around the blade or passing around the blade, and if the knife moves and stuff, that can be kind of sketchy. I've noticed that also quite a bit with the tactile turn thumb stud model. Like, that's why I like the flipper one and why I went and pursued the flipper one. Now, you can reverse flick this knife super well, and that kind of addresses some of it. But yeah, if you're not like really in just the perfect position and like thumb studying it out in just the right way, you can definitely find yourself in a little bit of jeopardy when deploying this knife. So that one's been a little questionable. Sometimes the detents are tighter or looser depending on how worked in it is. I feel different ways. This one always feels very safe to me in the f5.5 because again, a reverse flick, you're pretty unlikely. You have to like really be like flexible to get your finger up here to cut yourself. Like your finger is generally going to be a good inch or two away from the knife when you're deploying a knife like that. So I think that's a really good one on the safety side. And then I think above all, like the Demcos, you know, they let you completely clear your hand from the knife path in every single way. Now, if you do deploy them, they're very springy, kind of like the bug out. A little higher strength detent than the bug out. It takes a little more effort, maybe like 25 to 50% more effort, depending on how broken in the knife is. But I find that one to also be one that's just very safe for both opening and closing. There are obviously like a ton more knives, a ton more methods, a lot more locking mechanisms out there. I've seen them done in all sorts of ways, of course. But these were just some thoughts that came to mind, is that, you know, deployment matters. And more than ever, I've begun to appreciate the ability to, you know, especially with the holidays here and stuff and opening packages, and now doing this knife channel, I'm opening packages even more than I ever have. Get the knife out, do the job, put the knife away has become something that's a higher priority for me than ever before, I think, in my life. And I really have come to appreciate good deployment because it actually affects not a good part of my day, but like the experience in doing something. You know, things can feel tedious or they can feel expedited. And these knives done the right way, opened in the right way, can be safer, more, you know, make your life feel a little more convenient, and can really just sort of make you enjoy whatever task you're going after, whether it's some sort of hard use task and you're going to bring, you know, a bigger 8020S Demco to the job, or whether it's, you know, opening a package and doing something pretty simple. I think I've really come to appreciate, having handled a lot more knives this year than ever before, the experience and the diversity in deployment and how much that can affect your user experience. And that should be a really key element of what you shop for. Now, obviously my channel is called Pocket Priorities, but if you look at the scoring system that I have sort of three elements that kind of blend into each other. There's there are quite a few elements, but like there's the pocket score, the pocket clip. So that's 20 points out of 100. But there's also the mix of deployment and locking mechanism, which really is another 20 points. There's actually a pretty good weighting on deployment if you want to include locking mechanism into deployment, which, you know, I'd say deployment, I'm thinking more about external deployment or bringing the knife out. And the locking mechanism, a mix of course, how strong it is, but also putting the knife away and like what that experience is. For instance, this is one that I would rate fairly low on locking mechanism. I like the fact that it is a liner lock versus a frame lock for this knife, but the locking mechanism is hard to get to, and it's kind of, it puts a hot spot on your thumb when you try to get to it. So that's like one of the bigger criticisms a lot of people have had on that knife, is that this isn't cut away in a way to really easily access the locking mechanism like you have on this Devo Stout. A really nice cutout there. You can just see how exposed that is, and it's soft on the thumb and easy to get to, and just feels good when you use it. So those are my general thoughts. I have a lot more, but I don't want to like run this video much longer than that. I just think this one was much more about some of the you know, big things, the type of engagement you have with the blade, whether it's a fuller thumb stud or using the locking mechanism, etc. Flipper tab, sort of the four main ways of opening a folding knife. The you know, actual way you have to do it. Do you do it with a rollout? Do you do it with a you know, a reverse flick? Can you, or do you do it with a thumb flick, I guess you call it, or a thumb actuation? Do you use the actual locking mechanism itself, which you can on this knife, but something more like over here with the Demco? And then lastly, like the detent, does that create issues? And then the safety element of what you have. So with those things in mind, those are the things that I think of, and I'll include some of those, in the description as food for thought when you're shopping for your next knife. So thanks, take care, and we will see you on the next one.